Ich bin Jason. Today, I am doing part 2 of Oversimplified World War One. The first one was funny, so let's see what the second one has to offer. And this isn't the first time I've seen it, just to let all you know.
With both sides stuck in a hard stalemate, they knew this war wasn't going to be about taking territory, but about simply wearing each other down. The Allies had plenty of men to expend from its overseas dominions, and the British also started a naval blockade, so Germany couldn't import stuff, like food. Neither side really wanted.
The thing is, that blockade, that killed more civilians than any of those gas or Zeppelin raids ever did.
A long, grueling war, though, so they both thought of ways to break the deadlock on the Western Front. Idea number one, new frontiers. When the war first broke out, Australia was quick to take German New Guinea. The Allies also quickly jumped on Germany's colonies in Africa, and particularly in Germany.
In German East Africa, the land ending was went a little sideways like the port because the Indian troops got chased away by bees. True story, look it up.
Africa, locals were enlisted as soldiers and carriers by both sides, leading to a tragic loss of life for the native Africans. Some new combatants entered the war as well. The Allies' new friends were Italy and Japan. Japan was busy building itself an empire, so it was more than happy to take away German islands and colonies in East Asia. Italy actually had an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war, but after some tense relations, and then the Allies promising to give them some of Austria-Hungary's stuff, they switched sides. Italy opened up a front in the mountains here, but like everyone else, they were stuck in stalemate for most of
Yeah, there were 12 battles in Isanzo, and they were completely ridiculous.
the war. The Central Powers' new friend was a struggling empire in the Middle East. The Ottomans were divided on whether to actually join the war or not, since they had been exhausted by the recent Balkan Wars. Some of the politicians who did want to join went off on their own and fired some shells at Russia. And then came...
Okay, the Ottomans at this point, like I said before, through bad leadership, they're kind of getting close to being on their last legs.
And said, whoops, looks like we're at war now. The Ottoman entry into the war was of particular concern to the British, since the Middle East was full of oil, and Britain wanted all of that oil. First, the Ottomans tried to attack Russia in the Caucasus Mountains, but they weren't prepared for the cold, and many of them froze to death. Then...
Why is that always happening with Russia? You invade it, they burn everything, and then you just die in winter. To be honest, using the vastness of your country definitely is a good strategic advantage.
Miles of desert to take the Suez Canal from the British, but that failed too. Then the Allies tried to take the Dardanelles at Gallipoli in a long and hard trench warfare campaign, but that also failed.
Gallipoli, imagine like a World War II, the predecessor to World War One, but actually fails. Sorry, no, predecessor to World War II, but goes wrong, like Operation Overlord. And this is where the Australians fought on their own.
Ottomans blamed their initial losses on the ethnic Armenians living within Ottoman territory, and the resulting Armenian genocide led to the deaths of 1.5 million people.
Yeah, I hear some people say they didn't happen, but it's the fact they happened.
Ottomans sent spies into Afghanistan to try to convince the Arab tribes there to rise up in jihad against the British and attack India. But that plan failed, partly because the spies got bored, brewed their own alcohol, and got drunk, which is a bad thing to do in Afghanistan. All these new frontiers hadn't done much to change the war. Aware that the Allies had more men and supplies than them, the Germans knew they had to do something to break the stalemate. Before the war, there was a big conference that set out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no killing civilians. Basically, don't be jerks. The Germans held a meeting and decided to be jerks. Zeppelin air raids commenced over British cities. They also started attacking the Allied trenches with chlorine gas.
If you can attack these places, and you know your enemy is numerically superior than you, you're probably going to turn to those. Whether that was morally wrong, yes, that is these were definitely against some of the rules of warfare at the time, but they did get desperate.
They used submarines to sink civilian ships. One such civilian ship was the Lusitania, which had 159 Americans on board when it was sunk. Further...
Okay, when they sunk civilian ships, it wasn't exactly just torpedo them out of nowhere while you're or beneath the water. It was first they'd surface and then order the crews and passengers to abandon the ship because they knew they were carrying war materials along.
US opinion against the Germans. Not to be completely unfair to the Germans, the Allies also engaged in chemical warfare soon after, and they had been hiding anti-submarine weapons on their civilian ships, which let the Germans justify their attacks. Meanwhile, Austria-Hungary still hadn't dealt with Serbia, so the Central Powers enlisted some help. Bulgaria wished it was bigger and was still bitter about losing the Second Balkan War. The Central Powers promised to make all of Bulgaria's wildest dreams come true if they helped, so they signed on, and together they knocked out Serbia. The Serbian troops retreated through Albania, which was neutral but had some ties to Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary entered Albania in a friendly invasion to chase down the Serbians, many of whom escaped by sea. It's 1916, and a lot is happening. As if they didn't have enough enemies already, Germany added one more to the list. Portugal had been getting a bit chummy with the Allies behind the scenes, and Germany didn't like that one.
This is also the same year that the Easter Rising takes place, I believe.
Around the same time, the only sea battle of the war happened. Both sides had a new powerful class of battleships called dreadnoughts, but they were so expensive to build that neither side wanted to risk losing them in a battle, so they kept them in port, except for one time when they had a big fight and a bunch of them got damaged, so they didn't try that again. The UK started conscripting men to the army, so they had plenty of reserves, which is just as well because the Western Front was about to get brutal. The longest and one of the bloodiest battles of the war started when the Germans launched an attack around the French city of Verdun. The French defended it desperately, leading to hundreds of thousands of casualties. Under pressure,
The man that led the French in the Battle of Verdun was Philippe Pétain, and that was later the dictator of Vichy France.
French called on its allies to do something to draw the Germans' attention away, so the British started their own long and brutal fight, the Battle of the Somme, with 60,000 British casualties on just the first day. It was also here that the British first used one crazy brand new piece of sci-fi technology. The Russians had been getting pushed back further and further into their own territory, but in response to the French call for help, they began a huge offensive, and did really well until they ran out of supplies and got stuck. Seeing how well the Russians had been doing, Romania decided now would be a great time to jump in and win the war. And then they got pounded. The Greeks were fighting amongst themselves about whether to join the war or not. The king liked the Central Powers, while the Prime Minister wanted to join the Allies. After a brief national schism, during which the country split into two, the king finally abdicated and the country reunited. With Allied help, they began a new offensive. In the Middle East, Russia was pushing into Ottoman territory from the north. The British had also made a landing in Mesopotamia.
I don't think the Ottomans are going to mind that much because a lot of that probably would be rocky terrain or desert. There wouldn't be many natural things for you to defend and or
Persia's
occupy
oil fields.
with.
And they had also sent a small army up the Tigris River to try to take Baghdad. But the army got sieged in the town of Kut along the way, and eventually surrendered. A new offensive was launched from the south with all-out desert warfare. The offensive was aided by one famous British officer, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, who helped lead the Arab tribes in a revolt that wreaked havoc on the Ottoman supply lines. By the time
The Arab tribes, they were promised independence.
1917 rolled around, everyone was exhausted. There were mutinies in the French army, the German populace was starving, and the war had drained all of Russia's supplies. There was no clear winner, and it was still anyone's war. The only question now was, who was going to break first? And the answer was Russia. Tired of not eating, and mad that a crazy magic homeless guy was calling some of the shots, there was
Allegedly. He was a magic
uprising
man.
in Petrograd, complete with riots and strikes. The riots turned into a full-scale revolution, and a new government overthrew the Tsar. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the new government, and they pulled Russia out of the war. This was great news for Germany.
When the Bolsheviks tried to negotiate with the Germans, they did it 2 times. The first time, Leon Trotsky tried to agree with them, and the Germans were bringing really harsh terms because they were winning the war. But then later Trotsky thought, how about no war, no peace? No war means we'll stop fighting them, but no peace means we'll not sign the peace treaty. Once they see we stop fighting, they'll have to leave us alone, they thought. And that worked just as well as you thought. it went disastrously wrong.
Only had to focus on the Western Front, but there was still one problem. The pesky United States of America was looking increasingly like it was going to join the war. America had been selling supplies to the Allies throughout the war and was getting super rich off the back of it, meaning it was in fantastic shape and was dangerous to the Germans. So Germany sent a telegram to Mexico saying, wouldn't it be crazy cool if you guys attacked America? But the British intercepted the message, showed it to the Americans.
Now the reason how the British were able to intercept that, because the the underwater telegraph cables, they went from Berlin, then to London, then to DC. And also at this point, America was probably going to join anyway. And besides, they had to do something. If America joined, they had to do something to keep them occupied.
And that was the final straw. American troops began shipping out to Europe. This was terrible news for Germany, and they knew their only hope now was to force France and the UK to surrender before the fresh American troops arrived. It was now or never, so they started one final attack. They converged their troops and hit hard at the Somme and pushed the Allies back. They hit a second time further north, then again and again. With each hit, the Germans were spending more and more resources, while the Allies were getting better and better at repelling their attacks. By the fifth punch, the Allies held the line.
During this offensive, there was one German soldier called Ernst Junger, later the author of Der Sturm aus Stoll. He talks about a story, how he went into a trench and found a wounded soldier. He was like full with testosterone at this time, so he was kind of in a rage. Well, not, more just like an adrenaline rage. So he pointed his gun to the British soldier, and as the British soldier was begging for his life, he showed him a picture of his family. Junger closed his eyes, cooled his head down, and then walked away.
Even pushed back. With American troops now arriving in larger numbers, the Allies launched a counterattack, and that was it. The Central Powers were being pushed back on all fronts. Bulgaria collapsed first, followed by the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary, and finally on November 11th, 1918, at 11 o'clock, Germany surrendered.
Now it took time to supposedly be passed down for the front, but also be symbolic of the 11th hour of the 11th day. And the Allies were still carrying out offensives. Arguably the last man to be killed on the Western Front was an American soldier named Henry Gunther. Gunther was demoted, like from a sergeant to a private, and he knew what he was doing. He was charging at a German machine gun nest, and the Germans were trying to flag him down. And he was killed 1 minute before, or it was 11 o'clock.
Peace treaty, Germany was forced to reduce its military, accept war guilt, and pay the bill for the war. After indescribable suffering and millions dead, the world learnt its lesson and never had such an awful war again.
For about
20 years.
Okay, that was World War I Oversimplified Part 2. Thank you all for joining in with me. God bless you all. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Goodbye.